What is going on, everybody? SchwayZ here, and in today's video I'm really excited because we're going to be reviewing the 2022 Mercedes-Benz AMG GT 43. Now before we get started, I do want to extend a huge thank you to Exclusive Cars here of South Salt Lake, Utah. If you guys are in the market for a used vehicle, make sure you check out their inventory. I'm going to put their information down in the description below so you guys can reach out to them. Okay, so what is the AMG GT 43? Well, good question, because in my personal opinion, this is a vehicle that nobody really asked for. And the reason I say that is this is a four-door sports saloon sedan coupe, or however you call it, because this is a four-door arrangement, but it does have a sloping coupe-like roofline. So this is kind of like, think of an Audi A7 or a BMW 8 Series Grand Coupe. This is kind of along the same lines. Now, the reason I say this is a vehicle nobody asked for is because, well, Mercedes already has a high-performance four-door coupe. It kind of actually invented the segment back in the 2000s, and I'm sure you guys know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the CLS coupe, which is pretty much the exact same thing, but this thing is a little bit different, and here's how. So you guys may be familiar with the AMG GT, which is a two-door sport coupe, sport car type of arrangement that replaced the Mercedes SLS back in the mid-2010s. Well, they decided to make a four-door version of that vehicle, and you know, you can tell that the styling is very similar to the AMG GT coupe, but because of the lack of practicality of that vehicle, since it didn't even have a second row of seats, they decided to make this thing to kind of appeal to those buyers who wanted a GT sports car, but they didn't want the, you know, lack of practicality, and so they still wanted to carry their family around. And so that's where this thing kind of came from, but I still feel like this is too similar to the CLS coupe, even though the styling is a little bit different, and we'll show you that here in just a second. Now, what's interesting is the AMG GT 43 that I'm reviewing today shares the exact same engine as the CLS 450, but Mercedes does change it up a little bit in this AMG version, and the price point reflects that as well. Now, the first thing I want to point out is Mercedes says this is the first four-door AMG developed vehicle ever made. Now, I honestly think that's kind of fancy marketing than anything else, because they do have the S63 with the four doors, but that wasn't developed as an AMG platform only, versus this thing, it is only available as an AMG. So it is kind of fancy marketing, but I do understand what they mean by that, because you can't get this in a non-AMG version, even though this exact same engine is shared with the CLS 450. Now, this is kind of the entry-level AMG. This is really the best way to get into an AMG-only type of vehicle, since this is not offered as a non-AMG version for pretty much the lowest price. But the price is not cheap by any means. We'll talk about that here closer to the end of the video. Now, what is interesting is, even though this is based on the two-door GT model, the platform and the chassis is actually based on an E-Class. So it doesn't actually share any of the underpinnings of the GT, but it does share the styling. And you guys can really tell when I'm showing off the front end. We'll do a quick 360 here, because that's one of the first things I want to discuss about this vehicle is the exterior styling. It definitely doesn't look like a CLS from the front. It's got this aggressive, I want to almost call it a hammerhead shark type of look to the front end. I really like what Mercedes is doing with its headlights. They kind of, you know, come into the center here, just giving it a really aggressive and muscular look. You do have LED headlights as well, and these are a running light that you can see when it's driving around at night. Down here you do have this front splitter that kind of extends past the body, and then you have parking sensors, of course, and this over here is actually a large sensor for your adaptive cruise control. You do have a camera right above it, just kind of a subdued little Mercedes logo over here, but you do have a giant one down here below. You do have your active splitter over here where the vents will actually open for aerodynamics and ventilation, and then coming over to the side, you know, you can really see the width of this vehicle when you're standing right in front of it. It kind of has this wide body look to it. Really, really nice. Aggressive front end, aggressive hood with these two bulges that run across. And then coming over to the side, this is that hammerhead shark look. It kind of just slopes down, giving you an aggressive front fascia. Coming over to the side, you do have really nice, these are 20-inch wheels, and they're wrapped around Michelin Pilot Sport tires. So give you a lot of grip. Now, this particular one is the 4MATIC, so you do have all-wheel drive. I don't believe you can get a rear-wheel drive GT, so just keep that in mind. You have to get the 4MATIC. And then this is kind of where it outlines the Turbo 4MATIC logo. Now, this is a fake vent. This does not actually provide any real ventilation. This one does have the blackout midnight package. The trims around the vehicle are all blacked out. I do wish this was kind of a little bit blacked out. This is actually still a chrome finish, but the rest of the window seal is blacked out, and you do have the mirror caps as well blacked out. Looks really good, especially with this white and black contrast. I really love how the exterior looks. Now, wrapping around the side of the vehicle, this is where you kind of notice that coupe-like appearance. You're going to have a little bit of compromised space in the second row, which we'll show off in a minute, but it does give a cooler stance to it. It makes it look more like a sport vehicle. And the rear end is where I think it differentiates the most from a CLS, because this does look like the rear end of the two-door Mercedes GT. It looks really, really good. And look at the width of that rear quarter panel. I mean, it's got a big booty. I'm not gonna lie. It is a big vehicle from the rear end. Again, it's about the same length as an E-Class, but you know, it does look a little bit heftier than an E-Class as well. So you're not gonna confuse the two. Coming to the back, you know, you do have your quad exhaust over here with the rear splitter also blacked out. Looks really nice, and the exhaust sounds really nice too. So we'll show you what that looks like later on in the video, but you do have your AMG badging, the GT43. This is a splitter that can actually activate with a button on the inside, and then that pretty much wraps up the exterior. Aside from this little vent over here, this is also a fake vent, but it still kind of gives a cool look to the exterior styling of the AMG GT. Okay, so we can't talk AMG without talking about the engine. There's actually several different engine options for the GT 4-door specific trim. This one, of course, being the 43. This is kind of the baby engine or the base engine, but it's really no slouch either. This is a 3-liter turbocharged inline 6-cylinder engine with an electronic boost, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But horsepower figures on this is 362, and then the torque is 369, so pretty evenly matched in horsepower and torque. And you know, it may seem like a little bit on the lower end, but you still get pretty good power out of this thing. You get 0 to 60 in about 4.8 seconds, and fuel economy really isn't that bad either, because this is kind of a smaller displacement engine. You're looking at 20 in the city and 25 on the highway. But if you're looking to spend at almost $100,000, you may not care that much to save a few MPG down the road. Now, all of that power is sent to an in-house designed Mercedes-Benz 9-speed automatic transmission, and they work really well, and you do have paddle shifters to regulate that. Now, I want to jump back to this electronic boost, or EQ boost, however Mercedes likes to call it. This is an interesting system because it replaces all of the use of belts inside of this engine. So to power your things like the water pump, the air compressor, all of these things are powered by this little electronic motor. And that motor teams up with a 48-volt lithium-ion battery pack to supply power to those formerly belt-driven components like the air compressor and the water pump. Now, what this system does is it actually makes it a little bit simpler to go through kind of your engine start-stop when you're standing at a stoplight or when you're turning the vehicle on. You don't kind of have those jolts that you sometimes do with the belt-driven system in pretty much every other vehicle on the market. And it can actually supply up to 21 horsepower to the engine, and it also allows you to do fuel-free coasting and can recapture energy during deceleration. So it's kind of like an electric vehicle in a way, but it's also a hybrid, but it's also an internal combustion engine. So really interesting technology there on the AMG side. Now, in terms of maintenance, I don't know how that's going to be, or in terms of reliability, not sure how it's going to last, because it is a relatively new engine, but I really like the concept here. Personally, I think this should be kind of the future of electrification, because it's a mix of internal combustion and electricity and taking the best of both worlds. So kudos to Mercedes to kind of create this type of system, making it really, really interesting, and also giving you the advantages of both electricity and internal combustion. Now, before we jump inside, I do want to show off the Mercedes key. This is kind of your standard Mercedes-Benz key on a lot of AMG products. You do have the AMG logo over here on the back, really nice touch, and it's a really good, nice key. I like how they've improved it from the previous generations. But before we jump in, I want to show off the trunk area, because this one actually has a hatchback type of trunk. So, you know, by holding this button, it will open up the hatch, and this just adds to practicality. So again, they were kind of concentrated on making this the most practical AMG GT version, and you do have that. You got plenty of space back here. It's a little bit dark for me to show you, but you do have some hooks over here to hang some groceries. You also do have a 12-volt cigarette style adapter over here to plug in some devices, and then this is actually a release to fold down the second row seat, so it adds, you know, additional practicality. Now, Now, that's not standard on the regular AMG GT43. That is an option with a different set of seating packages, and I'll show you what that looks like on the second row, because there's actually 3 different second row seating packages that you can get, or I should say arrangements that you can get on the AMG GT. Over here on the left-hand side, again, you have more of those hooks, and you do have the same release for the left-hand side. Now, what's funny is you do have your Burmester audio system over here in the trunk. This is likely the subwoofer, or maybe it's another speaker, but it adds to the interior ambiance of the Burmester audio, which is really fantastic, and Mercedes has been using them for quite a few years. Other than that, you do have some lighting back here, and then lastly, you do have a cover over here so that when you do close the trunk of this vehicle, nobody can really stare inside, although this is such a dark tinted glass that even if I think that cover didn't exist, you probably wouldn't be able to see inside the vehicle. But let's jump into the driver's seat, because that's really the beautiful part of the AMG GT. Okay, starting off with the door, you do have a frameless door setup, as you can see here. That's pretty common amongst coupes, and the second row is even more interesting because this panel actually doesn't roll down. So when you do roll down this second row window, it does look kind of funny, but that's kind of what you get with frameless windows. Now let's jump back inside, and let's start with the door panel. First off, this is probably one of the most gorgeous interiors of really any vehicle on the market today. Starting off with the door panel, of course, everything here is soft touch material. You got leather over here. It is stitching with red stitching all across, and that stitching actually extends into the dashboard, which we'll show off here in just a second. This is kind of your typical Mercedes interior for the last 5 or so years. You do have your controls for your seats, so by pushing these buttons, they will move the seats forward, backwards. You do have heated seats, and then you do have a control to regulate the passenger side as well. So if you want to move the other side, you can push this button and it will actually move this passenger seat as well. Then you have your Burmester audio system, which really looks nice with this speaker grill over here. Has a nice texture to it, just gorgeous with that kind of brushed aluminum look to it. And then you do have a little bit more brushed aluminum piping almost. It's kind of like an aluminum piping that extends all across the interior of the vehicle as well. Coming down here, you have your lock and unlock, your door handle, and then your window switches do feel really nice, and they are, one touch up, down, as you would expect from a luxury vehicle. And then coming down here, you do have a little storage compartment. It is lined with felt over here, and then this is the button to open up your hatch. Other than that, I love the contrast with the red and the black interior with the white exterior. I think this is, how I would build one myself, because with the black and white exterior and the black and red interior, it's just absolutely gorgeous. Okay, now jumping inside, this is the beauty that I was talking about on the interior. I mean, this thing is like, I don't even know. This is like an orchestra of beauty. I don't even know if that's a real term, but this thing is gorgeous. I mean, you almost don't want to touch anything because it's that beautiful. I mean, you have ambient lighting on the vents or inside the vents. That's really kind of next level. And, depending on what mode you're in with the infotainment screen, it will actually change colors as it's blowing air out. So there's almost a theme to the interior ambient lighting. And I think Mercedes is probably one of the best, if not the best, in terms of interior ambient lighting. And I'll show you what those settings look like, but I briefly wanted to show you the interior with that ambient lighting. The blue with the red with the black. I mean, it's absolutely gorgeous. But starting off over here on the left-hand side of the steering wheel, you do have your auto light controls. That's pretty standard amongst Mercedes products. You have your parking brake down here, and then your hood latch is actually located under here. You do have more ambient lighting down by the footwell. Coming up here, you do have your vents, and then this is what I wanted to point out earlier. You do have this red stitching that goes all across the dash onto the passenger side, and I really like that transition from the door panel. Mercedes has always been good at that kind of stuff. It almost makes it look like the door is in one with the dashboard, which is really interesting. This is kind of where it gets pretty interesting, and another feature I wanted to talk about on the interior, and that is the steering wheel. First off, it is a very, very thick steering wheel. Mercedes always does a really good job of that. Even my old Mercedes C300 had an extremely thick steering wheel, and this is no exception to that. This one does have a heated steering wheel as an option. That is an additional accessory that this vehicle comes with. This is kind of where it gets pretty cool over here. At the bottom of the steering wheel, you'll see there's actually 2 screens on the steering wheel itself. So starting with the right-hand side, if my camera can focus and you can see in detail, you can actually cycle through your different driving modes. So there's Sport Plus, there's Sport, there's Comfort, Individual. And then if you push the button, regardless of what any mode you're in, it will automatically go to your individual mode. So that's pretty self-explanatory and easy to understand. On the left-hand side, it gets a little bit more complicated. So you'll see there's actually kind of like a dual screen setup. And you'll also see there's actually buttons over here on the left-hand side of this little unit. So how this works is you can actually cycle through your different kind of quick access buttons. So you have AMG Dynamics mode, you have your cameras, traction control, etc., etc., and you can cycle through those depending on which part of the screen you press. So if you press the lower half, it's going to go through your quick access buttons over here at the bottom. If you press the top half, it's going to go through your quick access stuff at the top. Now, what are these buttons for? Well, once you pick your desired menu, then you can push on this button to actually activate it. So as I push this AMG Dynamics mode on the screen, it actually pulled up your driving AMG modes. Same thing over here at the bottom. If I push this auto start stop off button, it will turn it off. So what's nice here is you have added customization to be able to get into whatever menu you want and be able to quickly toggle it on and off. I think that's a really smart feature because vehicles nowadays have so many options in this infotainment screen that if you were to put all of the quick access buttons on the steering wheel, you're going to have like a million buttons, which this vehicle already has, but this makes it a little bit more helpful and useful to toggle through different menus depending on which setting you're in the mood for. Now let's talk about this steering wheel itself. So moving further up, this is kind of like a 6-spoke design almost in a way because there is a space or a gap in between these different spokes. Now, starting on the right-hand side, you do have your, quick access buttons for your audio, your telephone controls, your favorites button, your voice activation. And then moving further up here, this is where it gets kind of interesting. So the buttons on the right side of the steering wheel actually control this screen on the right-hand side. The buttons on the left hand of the steering wheel, which have the exact same setup, those will control on the left-hand side the instrument gauge cluster, which is the left screen. So it kind of makes sense, left for left, right for right. But that's really unique. Instead of taking your hands off the steering wheel, you can actually still control the audio system over here by using the buttons on the steering wheel. That's pretty smart, and that's not something I've really seen on any other vehicle. This is, Mercedes-Benz MBUX system, and so this is kind of the latest generation, and really intuitive, really smart to use. It's probably one of the best in the industry nowadays. But what I do want to point out here is I'm not actually, pushing any buttons. I'm actually just swiping on this screen over here, and that is how I'm adjusting the different menu options over on the main screen. So it's cool because this is actually technically a touch screen, and then when I want to select something, I actually just push on it, and it kind of has this haptic feedback where it lets me know that, something has been pushed. And the same goes for this left-hand side, this top part of the menu. You just swipe around, and that's how you go through your various menus on the main screen. So, I swipe up, I swipe down. Now, it does take a little bit of time to figure out how it works. There is a little bit of a learning curve, but once you get used to it, it's pretty understandable. You hit the home button, it'll go back to your main screens, then you kind of just swipe to go through whatever settings you want to. It is probably not for the technologically deficient. You kind of have to figure out how that works, but most of the time, you're probably just going to sit in one menu and then not really adjust it after that. And then on this left-hand side over here, right below, this is kind of your cruise control settings, pretty standard there as well. This does have adaptive cruise control. Now, what I do want to point out here is you do have paddle shifters like I discussed earlier. They're pretty interesting. They're kind of like half paddle shifters. So you see there's actually a gap down here. They do feel really good and kind of chunky in the hands, but they're not like a full paddle shifter like you would expect. I think that just adds to the design. I don't think there's really a purpose to it, but nonetheless, pretty cool there. Now let's talk about this. This is a dual 12.3-inch display. So these are the same exact sizes. And, I'm not going to dive into all the features here because that would be like a full-length 2-hour video. But there's so many different menus that you can go through here. So, you have your AMG performance, navigation, phone, your driver assistance features, and then on the right-hand side, you have your navigation, your radio, other media. You can change the designs, go through your service. I do want to show you kind of the different designs that they have. So you have your sport mode, where it kind of changes the display a little bit to make it look a little bit different. Really, really fun to kind of play around with these all digital displays and just kind of change what you're looking at depending on what mood you're in. Now let's talk about this system. And again, we're not going to go through all of the different features of this infotainment screen, but again, one of the probably best in the industry, really easy to use. This is kind of your home section over here where you kind of go through all of the different settings that you want to go through. You have your AMG performance modes, here in comfort. You do have, the seat heating balance where you want the heating to be. You have your seat kinetics. And then this is the cool part. This is the ambient lighting. So you can pick the color that you want. And there's so many different colors to go through. And as you can see, it just changed it over here as well. I really like that purple color. So as you can see here on the vents, as I'm turning the temperature up, the vents are actually turning red versus when I turn the temperature down, they turn blue. So really fun ambient lighting kind of animations that you have on on this vehicle. I really love that. But again, just so much useful information here, so much stuff that you can actually go through. And then not only can you control it with the touchscreen, of course, not only can you control it with the steering wheel, but you also have this little touchpad controller over here that you can use to, just as easily cycle through it. This kind of reminds me a lot of what Lexus had back in the day with its touchpad, which everybody really complained about. So it's kind of funny that Mercedes is doing it now, but you're likely not going to really ever use this. Although it is nice to have your, resting hand position kind of sitting on the gear selector and just kind of playing around here. So if you are driving with one hand, this is kind of easy to do rather than trying to reach on the screen. But 3 different ways to control the touchscreen. You do have some quick access buttons here as well. So you have your seek track, you do have your home button, and then you have your back button as well. And they're also capacitive touch. So as you can hear maybe, as I'm pushing these buttons or as I'm running my finger across the touchpad, it will give me kind of like a vibration to let me know I've touched something. Now, I will complain and say this is all piano black plastic. I would have preferred maybe like a nice wood grain that Mercedes is known for, or maybe carbon fiber or something a little sportier. Piano black plastic is kind of a little bit on the cheaper end, especially for a vehicle at this price point, but it does still look nice on the interior. I just wish maybe they went for a different material. Now, where this differs from the Mercedes CLS is the CLS pretty much has the same exact top end of the dashboard, but this section over here, this kind of control stack, this is bespoke AMG GT. So the 2-door and this 4-door are the only ones with this type of configuration. The CLS has a little bit of a different interior, so it kind of really depends on what you want. Now moving further down here, these are your climate control settings. They have these nice toggle switches, which have this kind of nice aluminum bezel to them, a little nice texture to it. You have your fan speeds. So if you push on this toggle switch, it will immediately bring up the menus for the climate control. So kind of a quick access button, which is nice to have. And then over here on the right hand side, you do have your passenger side controls and then your rear defroster as well. Again, this is more of that piano black plastic, which I don't necessarily love, but if you push this thing back, you will open up a pretty big compartment over here. You do have a USB port, you have your cigarette style adapter as well, and then you do have 2 cup holders over here in the front. But what's nice is that you can actually hide this out of plain sight by just pushing on that and it'll automatically close. So pretty easy to use there. Moving further back, these are your quick access buttons. Now again, these aren't physical buttons. These are kind of, this whole unit will actually move up and down. The only physical button here is the hazards, but that's kind of a federal regulation type of thing. Another thing that's cool about here before we jump into the camera is if you just hold your finger over this surface by just sliding it over, it will actually slide over on the screen. So I'm not actually pushing the button. I'm simply just sliding over it and it will actually, highlight what I want to get. So by pushing the camera button, it will pull up your camera features, and there's just so many on this vehicle. I mean, look at all these angles. You have pretty much every single angle you could ask for. So if you ever hit this car, it's kind of your fault. And there's obviously parking sensors throughout the vehicle as well. So really nice 360-degree camera. And I really like that it's the entire size of this 12.3-inch screen. Mercedes does a really good job with a 360-degree camera system. Moving further along, you have your telephone controls, obviously your map. You can get a quick access for your radio. And then these are your car settings as well. So you can pull up your quick access for your, vehicle lighting system, etc. It's kind of like your settings button over here. And then you do have a favorites. So whatever you set as your favorites, you can set it up over here. When you push this favorites button, it will automatically go to that setting. We already touched on this controller pad. This is your gear selector over here. So the CLS, I believe, has your gear selector stock over here versus this actually has a physical gear selector. I believe this is just like the AMG GT sports car. And then coming over here again with buttons being screens and screens being buttons, this is kind of how you go through your sport modes, your comfort mode, similar to what you did over here on the screen. So you can actually control both using this button over here. So there's actually a lot of redundancy built into the AMG MBUX system. You can get a little bit of button overload or that feeling when you're driving in the vehicle. This one is a touchscreen, so you do actually push the screen in to get into your different type of transmission drive modes. This is your suspension modes. This is your traction control off and on button. I do think I have to have the vehicle on for that to work. Over here on the right hand side, you do have your volume controls, and then you have your auto start stop. This is how you activate the spoiler, open up and down, and then this is just actually a blank switch over here. None of the other car reviews I've seen actually have this with an actual switch, so I'm not sure what this actually is. Over here, you do have a really nice soft touch leather material. You push this button, it will open up. It is kind of a small compartment, but nonetheless, you do have that for extra storage. This is the passenger side, nothing too much more to report. Coming up here, I do like these crystal-like lights over here at the top. That does look really nice. You don't really have any type of rear view camera mirror, which is kind of surprising. That's something that I've seen in a lot lot more cheaper vehicles even. And then it's kind of dark. Sorry, I can't really show you what's up here, but you do have your lighting controls, kind of pretty typical, and then your SOS button as well. And then you do have a sunglass holder as well. Now, moving further up, you do just have your conventional sunroof over here. You can get a panoramic moonroof as an option, although from what I've seen, you still have a pretty big bar going down the middle. So it's kind of like the Cadillac CT5V that I reviewed, where you kind of have two glass panels, but you don't have one large glass panel, which really surprises me. I don't get why they don't do it that way. I mean, I understand that they want this screen to open, but you can still do that by having just kind of a little black bar going down the middle instead of a large piece of headliner separating the two pieces of glass. So honestly, I probably wouldn't opt for the panoramic because this is not that much worse than the panoramic sunroof. Okay, now let's jump into the second row, which is just as nice as the first row. Of course, you have these nice soft touch leather. Again, a little bit more of that stitching. Same type of door panel and the Burmester audio system as well. Now let's jump inside and show you what that looks like. Now, this does have a sloping roof line, so just be careful when you're climbing in that you don't hit your head, but it's not as bad as I thought it would be in a coupe-like vehicle like this. Now, legroom is actually really, really nice. Now, my knees are a little bit higher, so I'm kind of closer to my chest, but still plenty of space to kind of stretch out. Much larger than I expected to be. Again, this is based on the E-Class platform, which the E-Class has a really decent amount of legroom. It's not like the C-Class. Back here, you do have your vents here. Unfortunately, no ambient lighting for these ones, which would be kind of nice to see. And also, no heated seats or rear vent controls, which is something I'm going to knock this vehicle on because this is an expensive car, and there are other vehicles much cheaper than that that have rear heated seats or rear air climate controls. Now, talking about these seats, I mentioned that there's three different options you can get. There is a premium luxury interior package where this will actually be kind of a large console over here, kind of giving it a luxurious look to the back seat. I'm going to try to throw up a photo if I can find one to show you what that looks like. The second option you can get is actually where this middle seat doesn't exist. You kind of have a little compartment here, and then you actually don't have a center armrest in the back, but your seats are extremely bolstered. They probably come out like this far, and so you really have a kind of a two-seater plus two-seater setup where you do not have a middle seat. This is the third option, which I'd probably prefer this one. This is actually a fifth seat option, so you do have a headrest back here. You do have a center arm console, which is, I think, necessary for a second row seat. You do have a little bit of storage back here, nothing crazy, and then your cup holders pop out like that. Pretty easy to use. Other than that, it's a pretty simple back seat. You do have a really good view of the front. Let me show you what the headroom looks like. Really not bad overall, considering this is a coupe. I probably have about 2 inches of space. I'm about 5'9", so you could easily fit an adult back here. Really, I'm surprised with the amount of space in the second row of a coupe like this. Okay, now one more quick look at the exterior with the spoiler lifted up. I do think whenever spoilers are lifted up on these types of cars, it looks kind of silly because you can see kind of the black plastic and the housing that's used to open it up, but it still does look cool from this angle when you see that spoiler lifted up. I do want to touch on the pricing of these vehicles before we finish off today's video. So the AMG GT43 pricing starts at $92,500. Now, you can get the GT53 for about $10,000 more. That one starts at $102,600, and then you can easily get these for over $115,000 with all the proper options. This one, when it was new, was about $104,000. So this is, again, kind of the lower end GT43, and you're over 100K. Now, there is a GT63 as well, although they stopped it for the year 2022, but they're bringing it back again for 2023. But that one will probably easily go over $150,000. So this is kind of your bargain or your value AMG GT model. Okay, so this is an AMG product, so let's take a listen at what this thing sounds like. So I'm sure you guys heard in that clip, it actually starts up pretty quiet because it has that EQ boost. So it's that mild hybrid system. So it actually starts up with kind of a subdued sound. But then you hit it in Sport Plus and the baffles open up and you can get it to get that little AMG sound going through the exhaust. It's still quieter, of course, than any other V8 on the market, but it doesn't sound bad. It does have that sporty, typical turbocharged sound to it. And AMG always does a good job with its exhaust systems, but it's not going to sound like a V8 if that's what you're looking for. Well, there you have it, folks. That finishes off the review of the AMG GT43. So what are my overall thoughts? Well, it is an expensive vehicle no matter what way you look at it, even though this is the entry-level trim. Now, either way, this is kind of the best way to get into an AMG bespoke model without spending over $150,000. Is this different enough from the CLS? Well, from the exterior, I would say yes. Interior, maybe not so much. But I will say the CLS probably doesn't carry as much cachet as the AMG badge on the back of this vehicle. So is it worth the about $20,000 premium over the CLS? Well, I'll let you decide. But whenever I do see these vehicles drive by, I do turn my head because that aggressive front end is very attractive to look at. I do wish some features came standard on the interior, like rear climate control or rear heated seats, and I wish there weren't any blank switches, but that is pretty common amongst a lot of German and Mercedes products. But I do hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for all of the weekly car videos. If you are interested in this vehicle, make sure you check out Exclusive Cars. I'm going to put their information down in the description below. If it's still for sale by the time this video goes live. And as always, everybody, I hope you stay SchwayZ, stay healthy, and have a wonderful day.